Good Choices, a holistic conversation about dance, art, and life with Sabine Parzer. Hi, everybody, this is Sabine with another episode of Good Choices, a holistic conversation about dance, art, and life. I'm here today with Sri Louise. Sri is a yoga teacher and an independent contemporary dance performer. She has been teaching yoga in dance studios for more than 30 years. She has been teaching at Impulse Dance Festival since 2004, and she performs internationally in the US and in Europe. Sri is a spiritual activist, a performer, a fashion icon, a stylist, a feminist, and just an incredible persona. And I will get to talk to her about her many different approaches to dance, to yoga, to life, to politics, to art, and to being who she is. I bring you my conversation with Sri Louise. Hi, everybody, this is Sabine with another episode of Good Choices, a holistic conversation about dance, art, and life. I'm here with Sri Louise. Hi, Sri.
Hi, Sabine.
Isn't that awesome?
It is, and I actually really appreciate that. I know that this is a podcast, but the way that it's being recorded is that there are visuals that I can actually see you, which is
Yes.
nice for the conversation.
Yes, and there will be a video version of it as well. It's a podcast,
Oh,
but there are some video podcasts, and I can't really have a conversation without seeing you, and we tend to be embodied, and so I think it's kind of important to see each
yeah.
other also. It's so good to see you.
It's so good to see you.
Yeah, you know, it's such an incredible story. I have to share that with the listeners. Um, it's more than 30 years ago that I actually met you. And it was for me, we met very briefly, but do you actually remember that? Do you remember meeting
I have
in?
a very, very vague memory.
Uh-huh. Yeah. We re-met. So for my listeners, the story of how I met Shri was in Evanston, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. I was 18 years old. I had just left Vienna to go study in Chicago to study jazz dance at Gus Giordano's dance school. And there at this dance school was this incredible Russian ballet and Le Monde dance teacher, Anna Chayun. And she blew my mind. And in those classes was Shri. And we just connected. I think we met each other 3 or 4 times in the classes, and we had a short conversation afterwards. But you left an impression on me, and and Anna definitely left an impression on me. And it was really my turn towards modern dance. I mean, I was such a jazz dancer before that, and what happened was is that you actually pointed me towards Columbia College, which I didn't know about because I had just arrived in Chicago. And you said you should go to Columbia. They have improv classes, they have choreography classes. And I ended up getting my bachelor's there, and I ended up dancing professionally there. And so that was really a major pointer in my career. And that was you back then.
That is so amazing. I mean, I also remember this ballet teacher.
Mm,
And she was phenomenal. And I'm so glad that you remember her name because I would not have been able to remember her
yeah.
name. And I would love to know, like, is she still living? Where is she?
Mm,
What's
mm.
happening? But yeah, she was really incredible. But had I left Columbia at the time?
I don't remember if you actually. I think you were about to go to New York because we didn't meet again in Chicago. We met again in Vienna at
Right.
Tanzquartier,
In
which
Vienna.
is. I walked
Yes.
into one of the studios and I heard your voice and I'm like, oh my God, I know this voice. And then I looked at you and I'm like, where do I know you from? And then you're like, I think we met back then in Evanston. Did you grow up in Evanston or did you live there?
Yes,
You
yes.
did.
I mean, yes, I was born in Evanston Hospital and grew up in Evanston. I mean, I went to there was kind of some strange things with family and change of custody and
Mm.
schooling, and so there was some kind of weird stuff. I was in Highland Park for a year, and then I went to prep school. So I kind of like left Evanston when I was like 14, and I came
Okay.
back briefly for 2 years, and I went to Columbia College, and then was like San Francisco, New York, San Francisco, India, San Francisco, Europe, San
Okay.
Francisco, Albuquerque.
Oh, wow. Well, I lived in Evanston for
Yeah.
7 years. I mean, it was such a.
We love Evanston.
Can you talk about it? Because it's like, it's a suburb, but it's such an unusual suburb in terms of American suburbs. It, has a university, but it also, back then at least, I don't know, I haven't been there in a long time. It had kind of this bohemian feel. I mean, there was a coffee house and there was a vinyl record store and there was a vegetarian restaurant at the time on Dempster Street. I don't know what it was like to grow up there.
Yeah, I mean, Evanston is considered part of the North Shore, so
Yeah,
which describes a series of communities that are north of Chicago along Lake Michigan.
yeah.
And they're known for being kind of like quite wealthy, and they have there's a certain kind of class hegemony, racial hegemony to a lot of these suburbs.
Yeah.
Um, like Lake Forest was waspy, right? Like
Mm.
they just had these kind of like identities around them. And
Yeah, and they would get
Evanston,
more
I
expensive
mean,
as you get further along on the
yeah,
North
as you
Shore.
for north, yeah, right. Which wasn't to say that, Evanston had some really expensive, right, areas
Mm,
with
mm,
huge homes and
mm,
right, like, and I didn't live in that part of town. We lived in a very working class part of town. We were in
mm.
South Evanston, that was not far from the border of Chicago.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things about Evanston is that Evanston was a desegregated community before board versus, right, the Board of Education. And
Mm,
so it wasn't a community that was forced to
hmm.
desegregate. It was a community that had been desegregated. And so I think that lended a very different feel to, right, suburban
Yeah.
living,
Yeah.
that it was incredibly diverse, not just like racially, but also class wise. And it was kind of an amazing place to grow up. I'm actually really, you
Mm.
know, happy that I grew up in that environment. But I have to say, that was one of the things, and I don't know when we want to kind of veer into this, and maybe this is a segue, but maybe not. But when I was in elementary school, we had a black vice president. By the time I got to junior high, there was a black vice president and president of our school. And so, which is to say that, like, I grew up with black people in positions of power.
Mm.
And we had, like, every year at Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, we would have these auditorium assemblies, and I don't remember what went on in them. Like, I don't remember, like, were there lectures? Like, did we learn about the history? Right, we must have, but I don't really remember all that. I just remember we would end always crossing hands, as they did in the civil rights movement, and singing "We Shall Overcome," right? So in a way, like, I grew up as that white liberal.
Mm.
Um, and, my dad lived in Chicago, and I had a lot of experience in Chicago. And Chicago at that time was also super diverse, but it was also diverse in ways that, like, we would go down, my parents were divorced, and we would go down and stay with my dad. And if you got off the L and walked in like 2 blocks in one direction, you were like on the Gold Coast, which is this very kind of
Yeah.
like ritzy area. And if you went 2 blocks in another direction, you were at Cabrini Green, which was a
Yeah.
notorious housing project that was later
Yeah.
torn down. So we were also aware, like, at a very young age, that, like, there was some huge differences, right, um in the racialized kind of, like, living of in Chicago. But I did not grow up in kind of like a white enclave
Mm.
somewhere, like, at
Mm.
all. And
Mm.
at the same time, so I think that's also why it was a little bit shocking later in life to be like, I have all of the conditioning
Mm.
And many of
Even
the
though,
behaviors,
yeah, even
as
though,
right, as a white person who grew up in a white enclave, even though I
even
had
though,
not.
yeah, or even though there were so many attempts being made for inclusion, it's still it's still so embedded, right? Hmm. So I'm wondering which direction we should go from here because there's many different directions. I think maybe I want to start with dance because, like, when did you start dancing, or when did dance become a vital force in your life, which it seems like it has been over all these years? And where does yoga come in? Because what I see of your life is that you embody both so in in such an interconnected way. Like, I know dance teachers and I know yoga teachers and I know dancers who do yoga and I know who yoga teachers who do dance, but as I perceive you, you're a professional dancer. You you're a professional artist, and you are so embedded in the yogic practice, not only on a physical level but also on a spiritual and on an activist level. So, can you just kind of give us a little bit of an outline of which started when and when they started sort of merging or intersecting?
So I mean, was dancing. My mother danced. I mean, my mother danced as a child, and she danced also as an adult.
Hmm.
And she taught dance. We were kitty corner from a park district, and she
Hmm.
was the director there. And she taught, tap, ballet, jazz. She did flamenco, belly dancing.
Hmm.
So we had, and my eldest sister is 4 years older, and when she was 4, she was already in dance class. So it was just something that was just like part of our, I don't know, our family and a little bit of just the lifestyle. All of us, the me and my two sisters, we all did dance. So we had like ballet, tap, and jazz growing up, and but my understanding of dance was really through musical theater
Hmm.
and through all of this like Hollywood, right, movies, like these 40s, 30s, 40s movies, and Gene Kelly and Citrus. And so my parents didn't, if we went to the ballet, I think maybe I'd gone to the Nutcracker, but I didn't know anything about I still really don't know anything about, ballet. But I think my vision of dance was something that was like, I went to musical theater summer camp for 5 years, like and I think when I decided to like, oh, I want to go into dance, that like I would go like do this kind of like Broadway thing. I mean, I don't know. I didn't know anything else. And when I came out of high school, my sister was taking some dance classes. She's a visual artist, but she had also danced, and she was taking some dance classes at Columbia College. She was like, "Oh, you should check it out." And so I went. They had a like an open house, and Tim O'Sleen was the
Oh,
person who kind of introduced the program, and he just sold me. I was like, "Oh my God,
yeah,
I have to be a dancer, and I have to be a dancer here." And
yeah.
so, but that was really my introduction. I mean, I had had a little bit of contemporary dance my last year of high school. Um, and there was kind of this huge awakening because, of course, I didn't have the skill to be a ballet dancer, but I had the heart to be a dancer, right?
Hmm.
And so, and there was something about being in a contemporary class that there was a level of freedom that you could experience that like I didn't have the experience in ballet. And so, then Shirley Mordine kind of going through that program. But I also remember, I don't know if you remember the woman, really curly hair. She was the improv teacher. I think she did
Deb,
improv and maybe
Deb
composition.
Siegel.
And
Deb Siegel.
yes, yes. And I can remember that first year. And of course, improvisation had never been part of my dance rearing,
Hmm.
right? Like that was just not part of what we did. And, and that was still a time where if you worked with the choreographer set every single movement on you. The dancer didn't create, right, anything.
Yeah.
So it was a very different time. And, but it was my first improv class, and she was like, be the inside of a typewriter. And I was like, what
What?
the fuck and everyone's like going around the room doing stuff like, because it's an old typewriter, right, with the keys that you do like this and they go like that, right? So, and I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. This is like really weird. And
Freak show.
um this is kind of freaky. This is freaky. So but that started kind of, a long journey. And I think that there's something, and it's something that I'm just kind of recognizing now, and I actually really appreciate you saying and just kind of like seeing me in my practice, and
Mm,
how my dancer body and my yoga body have coalesced into something that is kind of uniquely me. And this is something that I've recently come to understand because I've started this new class that I'm calling Ballet Yoga Bar, for lack of
mhm.
a better way of naming it or describing it. And where these things are fusing, and there's something where ballet for me is a very similar practice to yoga. And so even though my adult dance life has all been based in the contemporary dance medium, I've always continued to study ballet. And at about 25, I started to practice yoga.
Mm,
And but also at that time, so I'm a contemporary dancer, identified as a contemporary dancer, performing with different people in New York, doing yoga, but also training like 5 days a week with Janet Panetta.
mm.
And so, but there's something about like the maybe there's like a similar linearity between ballet and yoga.
Mm.
And so there's a similar kind of way that the body and the spine is poised.
Yeah.
And
It's like a
and
reference to a
so like
structure.
ballet,
It's like a
yeah,
reference to
that
a
there's something
structure. And it,
structured,
yeah.
and that I'm inhabiting that structure, and the way that I inhabit that structure is a call or a communication with grace. Like this is what I found with ballet. That ballet for me is about extending, right, from me to the outside, and also receiving,
Mm,
and right, so but there's this like reception and expression of grace. And in yoga, this grace is contextualized in a spiritual context where
mhm,
I'm in communication with God.
mm,
Right. And so, and I had a ballet teacher, Augusta Moore, who has since passed, in San Francisco. And she was also heavily influenced by Feldenkrais, right? So she had a very somatic approach to ballet. But one of the things that she would, and it was kind of a joke, but she would talk about the ballet gods, right? And sometimes, like, if you did something really, like, like you found the five of the Feldenkrais clock, the five of your sacral clock in your pirouette. She was like, and now the ballet gods are right, like have erupted in cheers, and right, but she would bring something otherly
yeah.
into the ballet space.
Yeah.
And so, and I think, and partly because like I'm not a ballet dancer and I'm not trying to be a ballet dancer, so I'm not up against the struggle of being something I can't be by professional standards, right? Like I'm like I don't have that struggle. I'm not in a struggle with that. I'm not in a struggle with my body.
Mm,
And so I'm free to participate in the grace that is inherent in the practice. And so, and that's what, and so I think that that's the thing. Like for me, I can also remember I was in, actually it was the TTT that Jennifer Lacey had curated at Impulse Dance. And TTT was maybe like a kind of generic, it wasn't really her term, but it was like teachers teaching teachers. But it was really a space for, professional dancers to uh, be in conversation with their peers about dance, choreography, performance. And oh, I just lost my train of thought. What were we? Oh
we were
yeah,
talking.
and there was this question of like, oh yes, how did you get into dance? And someone was like, when I was 4 years old, I was already making these pieces and I would do da. And I was like, how were you already formed, right? As
Yeah.
a choreographer at 4, but like magically. And in a way, this person's life, I'm like, yes, I can see that at 4 years old, you were already like this particular kind of thinker.
Hmm.
Um, I did not come to dance. I don't think I came to dance in that way, right? Like I didn't come to dance as a thinker, and I think that's also why like improvisation was there was like, wait, what? I came into dance being a process or practice of self-discovery that I was trying to find something about myself that had inherent value.
Which
And
makes a
so I
lot of
think that's also
sense.
too,
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense that you continued into the yogic tradition, because it sounds like it was a seeking path rather than a I have to do
hmm
this as a performance practice or as a self-presentation practice. I mean that is included in that, but it sounds like your main trajectory is self-exploration. And I'm wondering, when you started at 25, when you started with the yoga, were you aware of the spiritual aspect of it, or was it mainly a physical practice for you at the beginning?
no, I went. I'll never forget this day. I was with Sarah Mitchelson and we were sitting out at an outside cafe on Second Avenue in New York. It's like 2:45 in the afternoon. We're having a glass of wine, a cigarette, and like doing our little like bohemian thing. And Molly, I forget Molly's last name. She was a dancer in New York. She walks up because through this, there was like a little, passageway, and then into the building and up the stairs on the second floor was Jivamukti Yoga Studio. And she comes up and we know, oh, hi, how are you doing? What are you doing? And she's like, oh, I'm going to yoga class. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. And I had already been doing like, I had been on kind of like a self exploration, right? So psychology is coming into tarot, right? Like all of these different, right, kind of methods for self understanding or revelation.
Mm.
So it struck me, and it struck me that I was like, oh, that's an interesting. So this is all about choices, and Molly is making a choice at 2:45 in the afternoon to go into a practice of self-discovery, and I'm out here, right, playing this game of persona with my glass of wine and my cigarette.
Mm.
And so I started to go to class. And it was kind of overwhelming for a lot of different reasons. And that was the second Jivamukti space. But you went in and you were like, whoa, I'm in a totally different culture, right? From like the incense to the images on the wall and the art altars and just the whole context. It was super like culturally based. Like you really felt like, oh my, I could be at an ashram in India.
Mm.
And then I went away for the summer, and I had kind of a so I went away for the summer. I'm 25, but I'm already in this because I'm seeking something, but I'm seeking something that dance can't give me,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated by that I don't make enough money, that there isn't enough of this, that, right? Like you work on a show for 3 months, you perform it, and then
It's
nothing,
gone.
right? Like you're
Yeah.
like, what? Right? So and I was been doing inner child work, and I was with someone who I was in love with, who I thought I would be with for the rest of time. And then we broke up, and I stayed in upstate New York for 9 months, and kind of really had this. I just felt like everything is broken. Like my whole life is shattered in just a bajillion pieces around me, and I don't know, something about my disposition. I was like, okay, well, I guess I can't conclude that everything is broken until I take a pursuit of trying to understand if there's something here that is unbroken, and that unbroken something would have to be what we refer to as God.
Mm.
So that then was my pursuit, right? And I was not going to conclude, okay, right? I was not going to conclude everything is broken and fall into, right, perpetual despair. until I was really sure that
You
there
had to
was, right?
investigate it. You had to have a thorough investigation.
Like thank God, yeah, thank God for my Sagittarian, right, like disposition, because
Yeah.
had I had another disposition, I think I could have taken a completely different trajectory.
I mean, so many of us, pursued this as a professional career, and I mean, what you're describing is kind of a very usual story. I mean, I was in the U.S. in the '90s, and it was tough making a living, and it was tough just surviving, and it was a tough, toxic environment still. I don't know what the business is like now there, but we were talking about that the other time on Zoom also. I mean, it wasn't the best of working conditions, uh, neither financially nor on a personal level. So there were, I mean, I would imagine if it was in the mid 20s or late 20s, many dancers give up at that time. Many just say, okay, this has been fun, but this is not a way of sustaining myself, either on a heart level nor on a professional level. And I know, I mean, I have so many friends who basically quit, yeah. And it sounds like you took it as a challenge. You took it as a challenge to go deeper and to not give up and to say, okay, what else is there?
I mean, I think so. What happened, and when I describe this, I'm really talking about my psycho-emotional
Yeah.
um, being, personhood, right? And so, um, and I guess people had asked like they're like, why are you moving to the casket? Like no one will see you. Like what? Like you're a dancer. You're supposed to be here. And I was like, I need to understand what it means to dance and be free of the onlooker or the one who is approving of me as a dancer. So this outside force that allows me the destiny of a dancer, right? So I'm on a pursuit to allow my own destiny as a dancer because I approve of myself, right? So then I came back to the city, and then I really like, that's when I just really, dedicated myself to yoga. And I think that yoga was the only way that I have survived this long as a dancer. And I think that without yoga, I would never have been able to have, um, I don't know, the wherewithal on every single level to
Mm,
continue to pursue,
mm.
because I think that I would have been really undone by just the continual disapproval and rejection that I always found in the field.
Oh, I can so relate. And the lack of spirituality or the lack of reflection on a personal level. I mean, I think a lot of it is changing, and we are part also of including that into our own work. I think what I have done, and I think what you have done, and with your work is exactly addressing that it's not just a physical practice. It's not just a persona that's out there that's being consumed or being judged by the outside, but that it is, what I call a holistic dance process. And it is a spiritual process, and it is a psychosomatic process, and it is a personal journey. And so, but back then there wasn't any guideline towards that. There was either that or that. I mean, you were either a professional dancer, or you were a fitness and aerobics teacher, or maybe the Feldenkrais, or whatever was starting to happen then. But it was all very separate. Yeah. So it sounds like yoga really gave you the, how would you call it, the glue to combine all these aspects with together, so you could hold yourself within that.
I mean, in the beginning, I would say that it was not, there wasn't a glue, but there was definitely a conversation. So my dancer body participated in the asana practice. The
Mm,
practice that we had was a very vinyasa based practice. So my dancer body and what I understood from dance, right, came through the yoga practice, and vice versa. Whatever I was doing in dance, the yoga would come into the dancer body. But I
Mm.
kept those practices very separate. There
Okay.
was no like hybrid. I was like, yoga's not a performance art,
Ah,
right? Like this is, and
yeah,
of course it's the 90s, so all this shit is happening now.
yeah.
And a lot of dancers in New York are doing yoga and then they're bringing it into their work, um and that actually shifted when I began working with City Larby.
Mm.
And because I was like, oh, something really interesting is happening with, and it's in some ways it's hard to appreciate now because I think we've been so inundated with asana forms that they've kind of become part of like the Western body.
Mm.
But there were forms that previously to the hybridization of everything that were still kind of like really unique to something. And so that when you saw them, right, like I was like, oh, this is kind of like like it's interesting. But it also, I guess for me, is also then brings one into the consideration of what does it mean to appropriate, right, forms and certain, right, cultural material from cultures that are not your own, and what does that mean to extract them and then put them on stage as a kind of artistic prop, right? um so right, and there's like that kind of um tension that is always there for me. But I don't have the same kind of like rigid, like, okay, those practices are separate. I'm
Mm.
like, I want to be able to um honor all of my practices, and also let the conversation of my practices, right, that are in my body happen. And so that's kind of what I guess where I'm at. And it took a long time. I took these photos for this yoga ballet bar thing about 5 years ago, that I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do this class, but I was really conflicted of like, I'm doing the same thing that I actually write and present about in terms of cultural appropriation, right? Like extracting,
Mm.
like superficially extracting something and then reproducing it.
Mm.
But I just got to the point that I was like, I'm denying something about my own pursuit in not researching more this conversation. And so I just took the risk and I was like, I'm happy to have the conversation. So if I'm called out, which I could write, like, I'm like, yes, but I'm really open and totally willing to have the conversation around what does it mean for me to take yoga out of its kind of spiritual context
Mm-hmm.
and place it beside a Western, right? A super Western, hegemonic
Mm.
practice of ballet. Like, right? I'm totally open to have that conversation.
I think
So
you've
then,
kind of,
without any
yeah,
fear, I had less conflict.
yeah, and I think you've kind of earned yourself that freedom because I feel like you're so adamant about uh, looking for the sort of the respect towards the tradition, the respect towards where it belongs, the respect for the original form. I mean, as far as I've read of all your posts and how I perceive you holding the tradition. I mean, I think you've kind of earned yourself the right to say, okay, and now I'm going to play with it a little bit.
I mean, I hesitate to use that, like, I've earned it, um, because implicit in that is
Mm.
um, because there's this dynamic of digestion.
Hmm.
And digestion is a, I don't even know that Rajiv Malhotra came up with this kind of theory, but the theory is, and there are different stages to the theory, and generally the first stage is like someone outside of a culture goes into the culture and learns whatever it is. It could be African drumming, African dance, right? Like it could be Tai Chi. Um, and they're a devotee. Like they're completely devoted and they could do that for a long time. And then there's this concept of I've earned it and
Mm-hmm.
now I can do whatever I want with it.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I am doing whatever I want with it, I still feel like I have to continually be accountable.
Yeah.
Like I never
Yeah.
earn
Yeah.
unaccountability,
Yeah.
right? As my position as a white woman with who that every single practice I do is rooted in another culture, and that
Mm-hmm.
includes contemporary dance,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
right?
Thank
Like
you for,
even
yeah.
though, yeah,
No, thank you for
there's
differentiating that. And I mean, we've talked about that the last time we had a Zoom conversation for the listeners. We had a Zoom conversation because I called up Shri saying, "You know what? I've created a card set and I feel like I'm guilty of appropriation because I put in a card that I called fake Indian dance." And then we had this conversation, Shri and I, we have this conversation about where does it start and where does it end. And part of the difficulty even now is that this privilege is so embedded in the language that even if I say I earned it, what the fuck does that mean? um, so thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. I
I
will.
mean, and I yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, you go.
No, you go.
So I was going to say, it was interesting because, again, I recall being in the TTT, and of course, because I'm my yoga is based in a very traditional teaching, and I have a very traditional teacher that's part of a very traditional tradition, right, in India, and so. Um, when I got, when I'm in the TTT and I'm working with, a lot of my other peers, and it's really in this kind of contemporary framework of like reading something, dabbling in something, being like, oh, that's interesting. What if I take this and put it over here and what does that produce? Right? Like I was always like, okay, wait, hold up, wait, like what? And I was and I kind of felt like I was like a little bit the Debbie Downer in the room because I was always just like, no, wait, like um something's kind of out of sync here. And I wondered like, and partly I think my own rigidity shifted,
Hmm.
right? So I really kind of credit this with helping, I don't know, like coming out of the rigidity. And there was also like this kind of fake therapy was happening, right? Like at that time. And so it was this way. And at the time, my critique was about approximation, and that approximation can be this really interesting process that prompts something new at best. At worst, approximation is a superficial extractive process, right? That doesn't take into account where the things that you take, right, to produce something new are coming from and how those peoples and cultures hold on to that material, right? Like so and that's where so it's like my freedom doesn't come because I disregard that. My freedom comes because I'm willing to continue to be in the conversation of accountability. And so now I'm able to be, I think, like creatively open, which is something that I think so beautifully happens in the contemporary dance world. Like I love contemporary dance and contemporary choreography because for me it's one of the most innovative places I've ever come across, right? In terms of like thinking, and my own mind is really inspired by that. I don't know, this kind of innovation. Um, but that I'm also able contend with not everything is here for my creative use. Like, not everything is an object for my creativity.
Yeah. You know, I can relate in terms of the spiritual practice that I've been involved with for almost 20 years, which is a Tibetan Buddhist practice. And of course, meditation is sort of widespread, and Buddhism is kind of hip. And, you know, wherever you go, there are these little Buddha statues and all of that. And then, you know, especially in the Tibetan Buddhism, there are some very clear rules. There are some very clear mantras. There's some very clear rituals. There's some very intense practices that also have been secret for a very long time and have opened up over the last decades. But there's also, you know, there's this watered down version of Buddhism. And the thing about it is I feel like if people are sitting a little bit more still, or if they're you know, taking sort of the basic idea of a meditation, sitting under a tree and being still for a few minutes, I think that's a great thing. Or even looking inside, or even if people catch a mantra and say that and they feel better, I think, you know, that's beneficial. And it's like it's not a either or, but it's and there is a you know, 3,000 year long tradition, and there's been, you know, 84,000 scriptures, and there's secret practices that have been secret for a reason, and you only get them when you are studying with a teacher, and you're also in a protected environment, you're in a sangha. And you know, so it's in a way it's an and maybe it's also a way of recognizing that, like, I I will never completely know what it feels like to be Tibetan studying Tibetan Buddhism, because I'm not. But I have had the privilege of encountering these practices through lamas that have passed it on, especially to Westerners. And I feel like I can have my and I'm really thankful that I don't have to live in Tibet or in China, or in, you know, in a I can live here and still have access to the spiritual practice, which feels really at home to me. So it is very multi-layered story here. But you know what I'm getting at is like, should we censor all these yoga teachers who have only done a year, like a month long teachers training? Well, yeah, it's probably not a very healthy course that they're teaching, but you know, like, people are moving, people are breathing. It, yeah,
Well, I have like so much to say about this.
yeah, go.
So one is that I started teaching after about a year of practice, and I had never done a teacher training program.
Hmm.
Janet Panetta was running White Street Studio, and Sarah Swatoni, she was co-running. They needed I met Sarah at an audition. She was like, "We need a stretch and tone teacher." I was like, "I don't know anything about stretch and tone. Like, I don't have, there's no cosmetic understanding to the physical practices that I do. So I can't do that." And she was like, "No, we really need someone." I was like, "I can't do that." And I'm a Sag. I'm like, "I can't fake it. I won't fake it." So, but then she was like, "Okay, well, what about yoga?" And I was like, okay, that I can do. And I did it. And that's how I started teaching. So, so, um, you know, I'm not really someone who's like, "You should do a 200-hour teacher training." I'm like, I don't know, you probably shouldn't do that 200-hour teacher training, because for so many reasons, that 200-hour teacher training um, sucks. But in any event, you should be a seeker. And this practice should be part of your life, right? And then there's already an authenticity to your engagement. Authenticity doesn't come because I've got a 200-hour certificate that is, right, like, acknowledged by yoga a lot. I'm like, there's no right? So some of what's authentic is that you are an actual seeker, not in general, but you are a seeker on this path, and you've chosen this path specifically because there's something about this path that you understand is your direction. Then I'm like, you know, for me, I'm like, I don't know, what other qualification, right? So, and of course you should know something. You should be studying. You should be studying. And that's not something that actually ends, right? Like you're sort of a forever student. Um, and that's sometimes people like do their 200-hour training and then they never study, right? Or they never have their own practice. So they never have their own research. They never move into a place of self-reliance with what they have been taught, right? So both of those two places, I'm like, I don't want to really be in a class with either one of those types of people teaching. I want to be in a class with someone who studies and who has their own practice, right? Like
Yeah.
that
No,
there's a richness there.
yeah, and where there's a personal involvement. I mean, if we're talking about authenticity, it's like why like inside of you, like what is in the practice what of you can I meet in the practice? So for me, it's less about the methods, but it's about the person who is doing that. I want to read something, or I want to ask you about if you can explain that a little bit further. I was reading all your workshop descriptions. I've been reading them over the years at Impulse, and I always enjoy them. They're fabulous. But in one of your descriptions, you write about inversions and subversion in a psychosomatic attempt to resist normative binaries of dominance and submission. And to me, that sounds like
Interesting.
you wrote that.
I know. Sometimes I write stuff and I'm like, whoa, that's great. I'm like, wow, really? I wrote that?
Well, what it sounds like to me is that the physicality of in and out, the practice of the inversion and whatever is the opposite of it, you're taking that from a physical or from the yogic practice into a political or a life practice. And I want to ask you about that, how you look at that, how you look at the topic of dominance and submission, of how we can resist that through a physicalized embodied practice, because I feel like that's at the core of where we are as dancers are at, and where we can also become way more active than we have been, because we're so busy with being beautiful and sensual and honing our skills. And I feel like it's time that we also, get a little bit more active about our voices here. But do you want to say something to that
Yeah,
relationship?
and also because I wanted to go back to something that you had said earlier around like, studying studying Tibetan Buddhism, but again, it could be anything from a culture that is not yours of origin. And and partly, right, because I, I don't live in India. I didn't grow up in India. I grew up in the US, which is an imperial country. And so I have what I call imperial privilege. Part of that imperial privilege, right, like some part of the dynamic of that imperial privilege is white supremacy, right, which is how, right? So, but like everyone in the US has a particular kind of imperial privilege, right? I happen to be white, so I also have, right, this dynamic of, right, the conditions of white supremacy. And so, and I have all of this Western hegemony, right? I have all of this Western monotheistic hegemony that is part of my like understanding of universality, which is not universal, right? It has all of these Christian, right, kind of values or ideas or Western notions that are part of it. And so that is the psyche that I take when I go to another culture and study or interact with their material, their sacred objects, texts, right? And so it's like I can have an understanding, like I can learn about karma, I can learn about karma theory, but I have deep in me the Christian conditioning of a linear time, which means that when this body ceases, I will fall off the cliff of forever. I do not have a sense. There's nothing about my psycho-emotional orientation that is cyclical, because that is my cultural influence and that is just part of like my nature, right? That's not my worldview. I can adopt it, but even when I adopt it, I'm wrestling with my own, right, with Western hegemony. So that's something about like, right, what's the difficulty, right? And that's also the difficulty of like understanding things, because it's filtering through this whole other, right, lens. But the other thing is, I think this notion of going to these practices that for me are the first somatic practices, which generally are all coming from India, right? Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Where there is meditation, breath, energy, right? This is the medium of body-mind connection. So, but when we go to these practices to feel better, right? I'm not trying to change my worldview. I'm just trying to feel better within the context of my own imperial colonial privilege without ever being aware of the positionality of that. So I think that was something that when I came to understand that I did not understand my racial positionality, I was like, okay, because I've done a lot of different types of work. And I had been in a yoga practice, right? An awareness practice for like maybe at that time, almost 2 decades. So why were there so many things about my own personhood and how that personhood inhabits a body and how that body walks in space in the world that I was so unaware of? Was there something that was amiss in the practice, in my interpretation of the practice, or just my own self-understanding or notion of awareness, right? Like, was I, and they're like, I'm aware, like there's this whole thing of like awareful, right? But it's so singular. It's almost like a kind of narcissism, right? A kind of like narcissistic awareness that does not allow for a holistic awareness that for me isn't just about being a better dancer, but it's just being a better person. And as a better person, then my personhood in this body, then that's who I am in the field of dance. And then the field of dance can change, right? Because I have changed. So I think that was something that I started to kind of overtly. I think I'd always sort of been an activist and always had sort of this like political something, right? But I really made my classes about, okay, we're going to take a half hour, the first 45 minutes, and I've got like a PowerPoint, I've got slides, I've got videos, and we're going to like, here's my topic, and I'm going to unfold this. And, it was generally geared toward, because most of the people in my class, are white. Generally, right, to that audience, and trying to deconstruct the imperial colonial conditioning rooted in white supremacy that all of us have, so that our awareness could deepen and so that our world could really change. It wasn't like some like, I don't know, hippie liberal notion, and I don't mean to like disregard, right, but this thing that is like detached in a way from real social reality.
feel like we can have an, I mean, this is a stupid question because we wouldn't do it unless we believe it, but do you feel like we can change, or we can at least look for the change within our field? Like, is it enough to do this work within the dance field, or does it really need some political action? Does it need us to you know what I mean? Like, we're talking about our practices and how we can bring a certain amount of shift in understanding. What I'm hearing is what you're doing, and I'm trying to do it in another way. But do you think it's enough within the dance context, or do we need? I always question that. Do we need to go out and get more gritty, get more outwardly aggressive about pointing out our views? And part of that is struggling as an artist and struggling as dancers, and trying to find an equilibrium within our body, practices, and finding, a sense of harmony, and not exposing ourselves to toxic environments all the time, having these finely tuned bodies also. You know what I mean? It's like, do you think it's enough if we do it through our embodied practices, or do you think we need everything we can get?
I mean,
I know it's a big question.
I don't want to tell anyone you're not enough.
Yeah.
Right. So that's like, I don't want to perpetuate the misery of that, right, kind of negative self-talk. So I think it's important I think that everyone needs to have a reckoning with their identity, which for me is political. And, and I don't know if the first part of that is like, maybe there's a reckoning with identity that is psycho-emotional, and maybe one needs the support, right, so that their personhood can go out in the world and do this kind of work, right? Like, it's not like you just do this work, right? Because I also think that there are some people who just like do this work. They're in our field, and they talk about it, and they write about it, and they've built an entire professional performance identity on the performance of political activism, but who are wholly unaccountable. So, like, what I learned in this past year, 2022, was that at the base of any kind of abolition work is accountability. That's it. That's all we have, right? Like, that's all we have for change is accountability. And the moment that I'm accountable is the moment change happens. So there has to be this fostering, like, that's for me what awareness does. What?
Yeah.
Awareness produces what in the individual? Awareness produces what in the community?
Yeah. It touches me because
hopefully accountability.
Yeah. It touches me because it goes back to the authenticity, and at the core of it is integrity. Are you living an integrative life? Are you standing up for your beliefs and your values? Are you holding yourself together in a way that you can be accountable for you? Because what I'm also seeing is that, there's families, and there's children to be fed, and there's, lives to be led, and how much, like, it doesn't serve anybody if I'm going into a burnout. It doesn't serve my kids, it doesn't serve my students. But what can I be accountable for? Is it for me, that's a heart value. like, what does my heart stand for? And if my heart stands for something, then I can speak about that, and I can act on it. And even if I don't act on it now, I hold it in my heart, and I might act on it when I have the resources for it. Yeah. That touches me, and it touches me because it's more quiet in a way also.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can be more quiet.
So, I mean, I will say this, hopefully carefully. Um, it's easy when you inhabit imperial, colonial, white privilege to not do anything.
Mm.
I think that's the easiest thing to do. And something that I realized recently is that because of all of my privileges, right, like white, cisgendered, right, female, like I'm, it's easy for me to not have to fight and make democracy real on a daily basis. So, in order for me to not be lazy,
Mm.
right? In order for me to actually then act in solidarity, I have to do something. I have to do something.
Mm.
And I also think that part of it is just like our cultural conditioning. So when you are part of white organizations, you're part of these organizations that don't really do much. And you know, when I think of some like a company like as part of a white company, there may be diverse dancers within the ensemble, but the right like the choreographer and everyone behind, right, production is white. You just tour. You go into a city, you perform, you leave, like you just tour. Alvin Ailey doesn't just tour.
Mm.
They outreach.
Mhm.
They outreach.
Mm.
And it's a very different way of sharing your art, right? Communicating with your audience and lifting people up in the place that you go.
Mm.
And that's just part of, right? And you can see this like um white dance organizations. They're just a dance organization, right? But you can go to other organizations like in Oakland, and the organization will be affiliated with lots of local political groups. And there's an exchange. But I'm like, I couldn't, like, movement research. What is the political, in New York, who are they aligned with? Who do they act in solidarity with?
Mm.
Right? So again, it's like this really isolated, singular privilege to just like do the thing that you do.
Well,
And other,
living in Vienna, you know, these arts organizations. I mean, the downfall of having lots of art funding is that people are in their little bubbles, and they sit on their resources, and they sit on their studios, and they're like, they don't have to do outreach, they don't have to do community work, they don't have to affiliate. So it's kind of this absurd,
yes, but again,
paradoxical
why?
situation.
But
Yeah.
why? But why? And that's the thing that I'm like, then you need to get exposed and you need to go and like be around, right, other people who are not living from a white supremacist imperial vantage point.
Totally.
Do yourself a favor, right?
Yeah.
And see how other people, how there's a kind of reciprocal or mutual aid. Like there are all these ways that communities are sharing and helping each other because there's, right, because, you know, like my freedom, right, is connected to your freedom. My well-being is connected to your well-being unless I have a class orientation that allows me to surf above your conditions so that I don't have to be concerned. And that is something that the field of contemporary dance has always done.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's even though none of us make the money that allow us to surf, but we have this like weird illusion. I call it like a classism,
Hmm.
because I'm like, you should be identified with the working class of your community because that's your fucking income.
Yeah.
Be in solidarity with their labor struggle. You're in a labor struggle, but you've never made it a labor struggle. You've never demanded that you get better pay or you get paid at all.
Thank you, Sri, for sharing your passion. I feel that so strongly. That's incredible. Your passion for your own inquiry and your passion for whatever you believe in. I love your videos. I love your postings. I love seeing you in these different personas. Also, seeing you in your different costumes and just just living your creative self in any moment. I really enjoy that from
Thank
afar.
you so much.
Yeah, totally. And
Is
you're
there
just
time for me to say, is there
sure,
time for me to say something more?
sure.
Um, sometimes, sometimes it's the field, right? Like, sometimes the field is the problem, but also sometimes the person is the problem. Like, I'm the problem, how I see the field and how I relate to the field. And I had a lot of conversations with a friend of mine here, and he's Mexican and is a flamenco dancer. And we talked about white body supremacy and how he had internalized this white body supremacy from contemporary dance. And I was like, oh, well, so have I, right? Like, I've totally internalized this white body supremacy from contemporary dance and all of the notions, right, that go around, that go along with that. And so I feel like part of my time in being in Albuquerque, and I've been here 8 years now, is to get out of all of the kind of rearing and conditioning that I've had. And there was some weird parts of that where like I have no idea what's going on. I don't know who I am, right? Like very disconcerting. And then I've started swing dancing. I've started social partner dancing, and it's brought like all this joy to my life. And it's really interesting because like no one's thinking about performance or right. Like it's a very different. Um, and but what I'm saying is like there's this thing that I'm like, because I'm not in like that's where I that's where my identity is, and that's where my value is, and that's the only notion of success as that identity that I have. So unless I get there as that kind of dancer, I'm not enough. Right? So then I'm like the carrot, right? The dangling. I'm like, ah. Now I'm like, I don't have that. There's no dangling carrot, and I'm just left with who do I want to be and what do I want to do as a dancer? And because Albuquerque doesn't have any kind of contemporary aesthetic, there's no company, there's no scene, there's no like the cool, right? Like nobody gives a shit.
Yeah.
They're just so happy for you to do anything at all,
Yeah.
right? I have all of this freedom to express myself. And so I feel like, I'm so glad that I got out of whatever I was in. I don't want to fully blame it on like, because I think other people are their creativity isn't infringed on by the profession. They're still able to do their thing. So I'm like, well then maybe the problem is me. And so maybe there's something that I need to do with and for myself,
Yeah.
right? And then some of all a lot of that falls away, and also then I can figure out like what do I really need to do to change that. And maybe I can't change that, but maybe what I'm doing changes everything, right? Like what I'm doing someplace else changes everything. And when someone else sees that, right, it changes everything for them because now there's a whole new possibility.
There's a whole new possibility to dance on a tennis court, for sure.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
It's
Like,
awesome. Yeah.
you
There's a
know,
bar.
yeah,
There's a bar anywhere you go.
there's a bar, right? anywhere you go, and that, right, like, and that I could share that with anyone.
Shri, I send you a big hug. I'll see you in the summer for sure.
I can't wait. I can't
Thank
wait.
you so much
Yeah,
for this conversation. Thank you for your language, and
thank
thank
you.
you for your feistiness in all of this. I'm learning. I'm learning, and I'm
Me
learning.
too. Me
Yeah,
too.
I think that's the biggest step we can take. Hmm. Enjoy your time, and then we'll see each other at Schmelz at the original. Have you ever been there?
No, never. I'm really
No, you never.
excited.
Oh, good. I was there at 15. That was where my first international dance classes. That's where Impulse Dance is going to be this year, is at the Sports University. And I have photos of myself at 15 taking jazz dance
I love
classes.
it.
So we'll meet at the original.
Post them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I will. I
There's
have to.
something, but there's always something important about coming full circle.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's incredible. So I'll see you there. Enjoy your life.
Okay.
Ciao. Bye
Bye.
bye. Ciao.
Ciao.
If you would like to know more about holistic dance and the Holistic Dance Institute, please visit us at our website www.holistic-dance.at. Holistic dance is an invitation to transformation through dance, movement, and touch. It was founded by me, Sabine Parzer, in 2010. It is a mix of different methods, a dynamic cross-method approach from dance pedagogical, dance and body therapeutic, systemic and holistic methods. We offer authentic movement, integrative contact improvisation, somatics and applied anatomy, improvisation, ecosomatics, and many more elements. I offer holistic dance workshops, I offer single sessions, I offer teachers trainings, embodiment trainings, advanced teachers tracks, year groups, and retreats. I would be very happy to see you at one of our events. And if you have any questions, please write me an email.